Good afternoon. Hopefully you can hear me. Everybody here okay? Great, good. Good to talk to you today. My name is Corey Haynes with Apttus. I lead our global financial services vertical. And with me today is Michael Galeros, senior software engineer on Microsoft Azure, as well as Cliff Goodwin, who leads our Apttus sales engineering team as well. And so we're going to talk to you a little bit today about blockchain and more specifically smart contracts. But before we dive in, I think it's helpful to just give you an overview of what blockchain is and smart contracts. And to do that, I'll let Michael Galeros speak.
Thanks, Corey, and big thank you to Apttus for inviting us up here today to speak with you. It's a really exciting time in the industry because you have, as Corey said, this development known as smart contracts. A lot of folks think of blockchain, they think of cryptocurrency, Bitcoin. Well, for the past several months, Corey, Cliff, and I have actually been working on the expertise that Apttus brings to bear around contract lifecycle management and applying it to this functionality in blockchain known as smart contracts. And so dive into that, but first, some fundamentals. So when we talk about the blockchain technology, which does power ledgers like Bitcoin, like Ethereum, but more importantly, provides this single source of truth that operates in a peer-to-peer network across a consortium of organizations. So you imagine each of a different organization running their own stack of blockchain protocol software, establishing a network where transactions can be linked and shared across all the different counterparties in the network. So you can see then, if we start thinking about contract lifecycle management, how valuable this could be, because those transactions could be any type of digitized representation of an asset or a workflow. It doesn't just have to be currency or a digital asset. It could be any type of instrument of value that's then defined in the data schema running on that blockchain protocol stack. The big differentiator, though, between blockchain and, say, a shared database is this idea that data can be only written once. It's this property of immutability due to the fact that every single transaction on a blockchain network is issued a set of digital signatures that then have to line up and correspond with digital signatures from all of the counterparties. So when we talk about the chain of blocks, if you will, that make up the distributed ledger, it's this idea that I have a group of transactions that are signed by code, that are signed by counterparties, that are linked on this ledger permanently. So if I post a transaction in error, I actually have to go back and post a compensating transaction to back that out. I don't get the luxury of going into a row or a table structure as in a database and have admin privileges and wipe that out and put in a correction. No, it's there for the whole world to see. And this is something that's really unique and fascinating about working in blockchain technologies, is as you put this peer-to-peer combination together with this immutability, you now have a trading network that can take reliance on a single source of truth. So if we get a bit further into the technology here, just going forward, a good example to see a smart contract in action is looking at a process that many folks are probably familiar with, buying a home, right? So you think about a home sales transaction, you've got a buyer and a seller, they're going to enter into some type of purchase agreement, and in the middle of that agreement is this idea of an escrow agent. So typically you would have the buyer, they're going to transfer the proceeds from the sale into the escrow account, and then if the inspection's clear or the loan paperwork clears or whatever other associated workflows have to process complete, the money's then released to the seller. There's a problem. What if my escrow agent is unscrupulous and makes off with the money? What if the escrow company folds and closes? You now have a very unhappy buyer and a very unhappy seller because you had this middleman, this intermediary, that was able to basically disrupt the whole process, and now you have a really bad outcome. Well, if we re-envision that through blockchain, and there's not a is missing a graphic here, but how we would disrupt this with blockchain is, instead of the escrow agent, you would actually have a scripted piece of code, a smart contract, which is written in a number of different languages. Could be JavaScript, could be Go, depending on the different protocol stack. And what happens instead is the buyer actually transfers the proceed into the smart contract. Because the smart contract, in addition to being a piece of code that executes instructions about the escrow, actually serves to contain value as well, because the smart contract has its own address. So I could transfer proceeds into the escrow account running as a smart contract, and then if my inspection completes or my loan settles and clears, I can then release the funds to the seller. Furthermore, if I don't like the escrow agent that's associated with that smart contract, I could have a consensus process between buyer and seller to actually find a new escrow agent. So implications of this. Well, one is cost reduction, because now if I'm actually running code and logic instead of all of this processing interface and intermediation, I could potentially expedite and transform whatever business process I'm looking at. So we just looked at a mortgage transference example. Imagine this could be purchase agreements throughout a supply chain. It could be syndicated loans. It could be any number of processes where you typically have a contractual arrangement setting up some type of intermediation or administrative process before then the actual transaction closes. Risk mitigation. As we mentioned, the blockchain is characterized by these signed transactions that are linked and they're immutable. Well, if those linked immutable ledgers and transactions are shared across a network, say of trading partners, banks, so forth, you could imagine the type of transparency benefits that then everybody in that network could realize by having their own copy of the ledger that's then synchronized with corresponding organizations. And then finally, reimagining processes. So just as we saw with escrow, we're seeing lots of movement in very stale, archaic, old-fashioned processes getting really disrupted by blockchain. I work on a project with a marine insurance consortium where we're looking at changing the way we do insurance contracts for container ships. So historically, you had to chase down all of these captains, the ship logs, the data about the ship, to try and then relay that information back to the underwriters so that they could understand the risk positions they were taking on insuring those ships. Well, now what we can do using blockchain technology is we basically digitize the records of the ships, make that available through a KYC process to the insurance community, to the underwriters, and then actually version the contracts on the blockchain so that the underwriters, the shipping community, and all the stakeholders can really understand what's my risk, what's the state of the ship, and is it a claim or a policy that I want to pursue and settle. So what are we, Microsoft, doing to help innovate and advance this blockchain technology? Well, the first thing to think about is if you want to get into blockchain, as our good friends at Apttus have done, it was intimidating because instead of just building the business logic, you had to come with all this other stuff. So today it's this very difficult to work with technology stack that has a ledger protocol, it's got key management, it's got this notion of having to have off-chain storage if you want to do any type of meaningful reporting. Interfaces with your existing business applications landscape become very, very difficult because of all these novel APIs you're working with. So it's a huge undertaking. So at Microsoft, what we said is, well, listening to customers, there's three things that really would accelerate people. One is if we could have predefined networks. So if I could come with my trading network and my consortium pre-established and defined and set them up in the cloud, I could potentially move much faster. The second is build this out into a stack, not just a standalone blockchain protocol and the smart contract runtime, but give me something I'm familiar with from an IT context. I need a UI, I need a well-documented API, I need messaging, I need off-chain database relational storage. And then finally put a simple UI interface on it that I can manipulate these smart contracts and these transactions with. And so we started off at the ledger topology interface, so working with very common and leading blockchain technologies out there, such as Ethereum, Hyperledger Fabric, and Corda. So making these very easy to deploy inside of Azure. We have our Azure Marketplace, which is kind of our app store for infrastructure. You could come there, you could spin up some virtual machines, you could instantly build a network, and you're off and running. But beyond that, we advanced it into this idea of this new product called Azure Blockchain Workbench. And this is what we collaborated with Apttus on, is we said, let's reimagine some contract lifecycle processes using the Workbench framework where we have all of those middleware components. We have this fully formed web UI, we have the API, we have the off-chain storage, everything we'd actually need to do to actually turn a smart contract into a meaningful workflow application. And so what this does for you then is give you this footprint. Again, one push of the button, you've got all of this infrastructure running in your Azure cloud subscription so that other enterprises who also have a similar footprint and environment can then sync up. So now you can imagine Apttus being perfectly placed with their network of user base to have each of these different entities running this Workbench subscription to be able to network those smart contracts together. And so real quick, just an example here before I turn it over to Cliff and to Corey to kind of show you what we actually did at Apttus. We have a customer, this is actually Bank Hapoalim in Israel, and what they've done is digitize the bank guarantee process. And imagine a scenario where you've got a large-scale construction firm, they want to build a shopping mall or a hospital, a big public works project. They have a whole network of suppliers and folks that need to be assured that the construction firm is good for the cash flow in order to undertake the project. They don't want to commit resources such as cement trucks and workers if we don't have end-to-end assurance. What we did in the case here, using Workbench, is digitize the bank guarantee instrument by putting all of that data on the shared ledger, the bottom part of the slide there, onto this blockchain ledger, and then using the Workbench services to have an interface around that each of these counterparties, the multi-banks, the construction company, the engineering companies, the suppliers, could all then see the lifecycle state change of the bank guarantee instrument. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Corey and Cliff.
Hey, thank you, Michael. That's great. So I think what we'll talk to you a little bit about next is really a perfect use case, right? And so a little bit of my background, been in the industry for years, licensed and all that stuff, but let's just go right into the use case. So the story first is thinking about what is the business you're dealing with. In Apttus, we have really 4 sub-verticals within financial services. We've really been focused on insurance and retirement, focused on wealth asset management, focused on banking and payments, and the fintech sector as well. And when you think about a use case, which is perfect in the banking area, we really carved out one what we call loan securitization, right? And if you think about 2008, I say Party Like It's 2008, great movie in 2015, The Big Short, adapted from Michael Lewis's book of the same name. I think it even received the Academy Award for the adaptation. But really the story behind that was one that was perfect model for blockchain, and more specifically smart contracts. If they would have had smart contracts at that time, maybe 2008 wouldn't have happened in the global recession. But before I go in there, let's tell the story kind of what happened, right? So we all know the headlines. We saw, AIG fall, you saw Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, the foreclosure market, the whole countrywide thing with Mozilla and so forth. But really the story really lies behind really 4 clear drivers that caused that. It's truly the law of unintended consequences. And it's important to understand that, because as you start to think about your smart contracts opportunity, understand the framework, understand what you're trying to resolve, right? And some things are unintended and some things are not. But more importantly, in 2008, there were 4 things that drove it. Number 1, you had deregulation, right? Glass-Steagall Act 1933 separated banks and so forth. The ability with the fall of Glass-Steagall, now companies or corporations or banks could take deposits and actually put them in derivative products, right? So that was number 1. Number 2, you had things like what we call the Community Reinvestment Act, a great act which banks are chartered to take money and reinvest it into the community. That's not a bad thing by itself, but the ability to take red line communities, underserved communities, and start to green line them said that there has to be opportunities for these underserved markets to receive loans to be a part of the American economy, to buy a mortgage. So how do you accelerate that? Well, horseman number 3, securitization. The securitization opportunity is an old model. It wasn't new 2008. Securitization has been happening for years. Securitization is basically the premise that banks themselves, when they give you a mortgage, they can package that loan, securitize it, and take it off their books. Why do they want to take it off their books? Creates more liquidity. Why liquidity? Allows more people to buy home loans. If you have a bank that has a certain amount of money and they fill out all the loans, that's all they can do. They're stopped there. But if they can take those loans and sell them, they can make sure new applications come in and provide a broader loan opportunity for communities. So you can see how that starts to develop. Now that we have communities that we want to serve some more of these communities, I could take these loans, securitize them. Now that the securitized loans, I could use deposits to securitize them, leads to the 4th horseman, which then caused the market to say, well, now all these things are happening. Credit default swaps are created, CDOs are created, all these instruments are created. Well, it looks good as long as the interest rates are low. I can give more loans to the community, more people can buy homes, but the minute those rates go up, that's when the problem happened. When I'm buying a home loan and the Fed rate is 1.75 and they offer 200 basis points higher than that, 3.75, no problem. I have a $2,000 mortgage, no problem. When it goes to 3 basis points Fed fund rate, and then that mortgage on top of that goes to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, now I'm paying a $2,000 mortgage is now $4,000, $6,000, $8,000. I can't afford it. But the problem is that as these were happening, these loans were packaged with a bunch of other loans. So you didn't know, I use the smoothie example. If you're gonna get a smoothie and you go to some Jamba Juice, whatever, they take all your strawberries and put them in and blend them. You don't know what the strawberries are doing. One of the strawberries are moldy, they put it with the good strawberries, you don't really taste it. But what you didn't know you ingested is a year's worth of penicillin, right? You've ingested all that moldy strawberries and had no idea that you were swallowing it, and maybe until 2 o'clock in the morning when you realize you have a stomach problem. Well, that's what happened with the mortgage crisis, right? And so again, if you think about the whole story of how securitization happens, you can see all the touch points that go along the way, all the different players, and each of those players are not knowing what the other is doing. That one mortgage that I had is being pooled or tranched with thousands of others. And again, the case of the strawberries happens. So the hypothetical is you're a homeowner. As Michael was using the example of the escrow, you bought your new home. Sure can't buy it for $200,000 here in the city, but just imagine you're some outlier place and you buy that mortgage, right? You buy the home, you get the mortgage. Wells Fargo gives it to you, just for an example. And Wells Fargo takes that loan, and of course they're gonna say, we don't want this on our books. You're a prime mortgage holder. In other words, you have a high FICO score, you have low debt ratio. I wanna sell that and sell it off my books. Well, to sell off their books, they're gonna go to someone that acts as a special special vehicle. Well, in this case, we'll call it a mortgage-backed security insurer. Say Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs says, great, I'm gonna package this up and I'm gonna sell it to some trustee who wants to buy this, right? And so they package it up. And they're packaging your mortgage with thousands of other mortgages, and those mortgages are being rated. Now, initially, I was a prime mortgage. I was top of the heap, 820 FICO score, loan to debt ratio was super low, it was perfect, right? But now as I'm put with these other mortgages, they're saying all this whole package, the rating firms are saying it's all prime mortgages. But what they don't see happening is one of those mortgages is starting to go bad. It starts to not miss a payment. It starts to default. You start to see that things are happening. But because this is all paperwork, you don't know real time what's happening with that paper. So that's being sold, that package is now being sold to a pension fund. And so teachers, doctors, educators are buying that in their CalPERS or CalSTRS pension. You might be buying it in a 401k. You might even have to buy it individually in some ETF and have no idea that the tranche you bought is going sour on you. That 2 a.m. moment is starting to happen and you have no visibility into it, right? And so that's really what was happening in this hypothetical process. And so what we started to do with Apttus is Cliff was able to use the workbench and actually simulate this and create a proof of concept that actually showed if you're able to create an immutable document, you won't have these problems. So what do I mean? Think about it. If you have it on the blockchain in the smart contracts, now you have the loan information right there, right? It's transparent, and it's immutable. Well, what do I mean transparent? I know what's happening every single moment. Immutable means I cannot change it. So I can't go back and lie on the document, right? Loan servicing performance, I know what's going on all the time. As payments are coming in, as an investor, I know those payments are happening. So if you ever have been an investor, maybe like on a peer-to-peer network, like Lending Club and so forth, you have people who owe you that money. You want to make sure those payments come in. Well, this way you're seeing it come in all the time, right? The SPV, the special contracts and special instructions are very clear. If there's a term on the contract that says it will go into default if you miss one payment, foreclosure process needs to happen now, that happens immediately with the smart contract. Goes to the title company goes to the county, and the county starts the proceeding right away, and everyone knows that, so in that tranche, you can flag it that this one is bad and make sure that you have some remediation for that. The ratings know it right away as well. The Fitch, Moody's, and so forth can rate it. Market movers and makers can see what's happening, and security is available to all investors because everyone knows what's happening, right? And so those are the benefits that you see. So we took it beyond that and said, okay, we know the benefits, we know the use case, let's develop this out. And now what Cliff is going to show you is actually how we use Workbench and actually created a smart contract process through our CLM platform. So you create the CLM platform using smart contracts or using the CLM platform from Apttus, and then move into now codifying that and using smart contracts. So with that, I'll turn it to Cliff, and he'll walk you through.
All right. How are you all doing? Okay. So really quickly, by now you've all been at Accelerate for a little over a day. Can everyone hear me okay? Perfect, perfect. By now you've been at Accelerate for over a day, so I'm sure somebody has run up to you and shown you what our CLM tool looks like. Don't worry, I'm not going to walk you through all the ins and outs of that again. But right now, just imagine we're at the end of that CLM process. We've already gone through, and I'm an internal employee at a bank. I've gone through and I've picked Corey's 860 FICO score and mixed it up with a bunch of 500s and 600s, and I'm saying that, hey, I have a tranche that scores around 750. And I've actually created an internal contract with that. I've gone through whatever internal process I needed to, and now I'm actually ready to start down the process of loan securitization, essentially moving towards taking this off of my company's books so that we can start to send out more loans. That being said, the first thing that I would do as that internal employee is click on Smart Contract Management. What's happening right now is we just jumped directly into the Blockchain Workbench, the tool that we use to create this whole scenario. Now, the first thing that you'll notice, stepping back from the scenario for a second, is that I only have one application shown here. There are actually about 10 to 15 in this org. This exhibits one of the most important and most difficult things to manage whenever you're working with blockchain technology in any real-life use case. And in fact, this stretches into just about any use case in any country: identity management, user profiles, and permission settings. That's inherently built into the Blockchain Workbench tool, and that literally saved me about 6 months of time of mapping, integrating, and trying to come up with a scheme to relay this into a working enterprise blockchain solution. That being said, this one contract that I can see, I'm going to click into it, and you'll notice that I have a number of different contracts. So, excuse me, I called that a contract before. That's actually an application. That's specifically the application that we've set up for loan securitization. The other benefit to the workbench is that I can have 5, 10, 15 different applications that serve different use cases side by side. They can be permissioned just like their contracts inside them. So right now, within the workbench, I'm Cliff Goodwin. I'm actually serving as the bank trustee. And I've already created a new contract for the agreement we were just on. You can see down at the bottom, this is for agreement 76. The closing price was $127,000. And the most important thing to take away from this screen right now, because we're going to come back to it through some of our different personas, is that there are no actions here for me. As the bank trustee within the scenario Corey gave, my job is done. I've already assembled the loan and I've put it on the exchange. Now we're going to pop over and actually log in . There we go. Now we're going to switch over and actually log in as April Approver. When April logs in again, she can see that one application that was enabled for her. She can see the 3 contracts that were present, but you'll notice that when we click into the contract, this time she actually has an action. Secondly, she can see exactly what Cliff Goodwin did before her. By clicking into that action, I can see, okay, Cliff Goodwin filled out all of this information for this loan, and April Approver is actually playing the role of internal oversight. So she's within another department at the bank who's in charge of making sure that Cliff Goodwin doesn't put up some nonsense. Right now, she's going to go ahead and validate this action. And you'll notice one of the other key benefits of this blockchain workbench. I was able to easily configure fields that capture actual values. So right here, she has to verify that she actually used a risk model, that risk model was approved, and that release of that model was approved. In addition, she has to record the model's name, let's say Model C. And as she takes that action, you can see that right now, this is being recorded on the blockchain right behind the action that Cliff Goodwin took. Everything's time-stamped, everything's fully auditable, and this is going to continue on for each of the users we log into, moving through this process. Right now, we're going to go ahead and log out of April, and we're going to log into that external trustee that we were talking about. And this is where you can really begin to see the true power of blockchain technology. This allows one company's internal contract to be bridged into an interactive application that can stretch across multiple parties. The whole point of blockchain technology is that it allows multiple parties to interact in a trustworthy way. So as I log in as my external trustee. Coming back to that same contract where the pool has been validated, under my available actions now, this is where I can actually create that special investment vehicle that Corey was talking about before. Now on my end, keep in mind that I, at this point, T trustee is at a completely different company. I could have some internal process through whatever tool I'm using that integrates with this solution to do this automatically. And I'll do my certifications and go ahead and take that action. And while that block is processing, we'll go ahead and pop out and move on to our ratings agency. Again, multiple parties from multiple companies are able to interact with this one contract once it's put on this private Ethereum network. Everything is set up beforehand, synchronized, and even the actions that each individual is allowed to take completely configurable through this workbench. Yeah, right now I'm in as Richard Ratings, so you can see that he can perform the agency validation step. And he'll give this a rating of 65. Right now we haven't built in any extra validations to actually branch off and make decisions based on the actual scores that are being assigned to things. We're just mainly working on the workflow. But we're actually going to come to the last key part now. The final person that would interact in this scenario would be the actual buyer. And in this instance, we've only added one buyer, but you could imagine this could be an entire marketplace of buyers. And this is where even this scenario can stretch and begin to bridge gaps across multiple different industries. Because the interesting thing about this this marketplace that's being orchestrated is
Try the blockchain one.
Yeah. There we go. The interesting thing about how this marketplace is orchestrated,
B buyer.
yeah, sorry about that, logged into the wrong user. Well, the point we're going to get to eventually is that the actual buying process doesn't take place between the initial bank and the buyer. It's actually much more of a distributor relationship, with the external trustee playing the role of a third party who's actually orchestrating the sale to the final customer. There we go. Here we go. So when we come in now that this is an agency validation status, this user has the ability to either purchase an increment of a loan, so he could buy 10% of this tranche, 15, 25, 30, or he could purchase the entire tranche. We'll do that for speed. And he'll go ahead and submit an offer price of, let's say, $110,000. Finally, we can sign out of this account and pop back in to my initial account as Cliff Goodwin, the internal bank employee. And this is where Cliff Goodwin will actually be able to approve the offer that was made once it goes through. As you can see, each of the actions we're taking takes a little bit of time. That's just the nature of blockchain technology. It isn't instant. And that's what actually makes the entire deployment package that Microsoft provides so important. because instead of having to do every action, let's say every query for a report I want to run off of the actual blockchain data, we have we have unlimited off-chain storage space where any of these transactions are replicated as soon as they happen. That allows us to create reports and fully integrate all of this data back into our CLM solution so that Cliff Goodwin, as he's going through this process with multiple tranches, creating multiple bundles, and ultimately posting them up for sale, can keep track of all of them right alongside any of the other agreement types that his role fits within the bank. Finally, in this instance, Cliff can go ahead and accept this offer. And from here, we'll just continue to log different internal activities that he would have to take that would be needed for audit purposes. All right. And that pretty much wraps me up. Corey?
Yeah. Thank you, Cliff.
Yep.
So you can see there a great example of how you're using smart contracts, using the CLM UI, something you're used to, but yet using the blockchain to make it, again, immutable, transferable, transparent, and also making sure from a security standpoint you have that. So that really concludes what we wanted to show you today. We'd love to have a conversation with you later about what we can help you with here at Apttus when you're thinking about smart contracts, building a POC. One of the big things that we learned is that, again, having a business case, starting with something small, working with a team like Apttus, coordinating with the Workbench solution that Microsoft has, accelerates that POC, gets it to the C-level suite that you want to have the conversation with, and again, you begin to iterate. And we're starting to see more conversations around insurance with IoT solutions. We're seeing around banking on the securitization side. We're seeing on wealth management with the ability now for wealth managers to use a block contract, or use a contract to make it auto-executable as the terms and conditions are with their clients. And everywhere we're starting to see financial institutions talk to us and say more and more they want to leverage this for the key things that I was saying: transparency, immutability, and security, especially in the world we live in with the increase of hacking and the increase of cyber terrorism. You want to have solutions in place that can make sure your clients are protected, and more importantly, make sure your business succeeds. So with that, we thank you, and we appreciate your time. Michael Galeras, Cliff Goodwin, we all say thank you, and we appreciate you here at Apttus Accelerate 2018. Thank you very much.